Okay, so welcome everybody to the first of the YWCA's Economic Empowerment Series, Practical Digital Skills and Digital Literacy During COVID-19. We are hosting these workshops um, every other Wednesday from now, February 17th through May. And all of these workshops are free and open to the public. And this workshop is being recorded tonight and will be shared with all who attended. We are so grateful to the funders of the YWCA Economic Empowerment Series, Hawthorne Medical Associates Charitable Fund, Operation Moneywise, and United Way of Greater Fall River. It is my pleasure right now to be introducing my friend and former colleague, Josh Botvin from UMass Dartmouth. So Josh, before I hand it over to Josh, my apologies. We will have time for Q&A throughout the tonight's workshop. So I just want to remind everybody, you can put your questions in the chat, and you can also, if you go to reactions, there's a raise hand function. So if you want to raise your hand, I'll be able to track that in participants, and that's when we'd like to invite you to come off mute and be able to engage with Josh in a dialogue Q&A. And of course, right, you can always send me a private message in the chat if you would rather I ask it anonymously. So I'm now going to pass it over to Josh.
And thank you everyone so much for coming. I recognize that in the pandemic times, anything in your free time that isn't just sitting and decompressing is a huge commitment. And so I just appreciate everyone taking the time to come and take part in this series. So before I get into it, because this is the first, I just want to give a little bit of a background information to give a little context for what we're doing here and what Jordan and I sort of envisioned as we were working through this workshop, and then sort of move into the more specifics of what we're going to be talking about today. So first off, I'm really, really grateful to be able to do this. I think this is just a really incredible sort of mission that Jordan and the YWCA have put together. COVID has just upended life in every conceivable way. And when compared to the more drastic things like food insecurity or housing insecurity, things like slight changes to work life are obviously not seen as a higher priority issue, but they no doubt are. And these changes from a normal office setting to a work from home setting have really, really drastically changed the way people interact and just live on a day-to-day basis. And with that change, there's been this an assumption of expertise, I think, that people should not only continue to do their day-to-day jobs, but should also then develop the expertise of communication specialists just sort of like on a whim and be able to have every small interaction that they have with a coworker or an employer be now documented permanently or done in a much more formal setting than something as simple as, I'm going to run by my boss's office and just have like a quick chat with them. And again, with it requires a strong amount of skills that I think are, often overlooked. And hopefully, I think that this is going to be a good opportunity to sort of bridge the gap between what life was a year ago and what life is now and could potentially be for the foreseeable future. So with that in mind, Jordan and I sort of initiated these discussions as how could we have workshops specifically for the YWCA staff and residency. And that sort of evolved into, I think the things that we're talking about here could potentially serve a wider audience. And so Jordan's idea was to make this for the general public. And I think she was right on with it. I think it's really a great idea. And so with that, one thing that I just want to say is that, as we're working through this and you're sort of getting the tenor of what these workshops are going to look like, hopefully today is pretty indicative of how the others will look. If anything comes up that you would like me to cover in future workshops, I'm not like a scientist or a mathematician. So like anything like within my specialization that I can handle, I am more than happy to adapt these lessons. And in the next slide, I'll just go over sort of like the general scope of what these are going to look like from there. So So today's workshop is the first of three workshops that are specifically focused on sort of working remotely. The new normal, my least favorite term, but the new normal of living in a pandemic and working from home, and again, something that is probably going to become more common practice the longer we go into this pandemic and for, I assume, years after. So the first of this workshop is the first and the second workshops are really designed to work in tandem with one another. So this first workshop is more structural oriented, sort of more general thoughts and skills that you can have with virtual communication, digital communication, and it's going to build into the second week of work, the second workshop, which is going to be much more specifically in terms of language choices and using tone and recognizing audience and things like that. So I would say if you know like what we talk about today and you want to continue on that. Next week or 2 weeks from now, excuse me, is really going to be building off of the work that we do here. And then again, just so there's 8 workshops total. 3 of the other workshops are going to focus on job application strategies. So for those of you who are either looking for a job or looking to transition jobs, we'll go over one which will focus really on the strategies of reading a job posting, which is sort of a complicated genre to look at, but we'll dissect it, break it apart, and sort of give you a clear understanding of what to look for and how to use those effectively and to your best, to the best of your efforts there. And then we'll have one that's about writing cover letters and resumes, and then a third which is about interviewing through Zoom or Microsoft Teams or another digital software like that, which can be definitely a bit challenging and a little awkward. And so we'll go over strategies for general interview practices and then more specific to interviewing in a digital space. And then the last 2 are going to be focused specifically on social media and sort of working through digital literacy, basically getting you aware of, you know, using social media in these times in which you're isolated from friends and family, but also recognizing, you know, the I think dangers are extreme. I guess with everything going on in the world, danger isn't that extreme, but like, you know, the dangers that social media does present and how to navigate those and use it responsibly. So that's generally what these workshops are going to look like. So today specifically what they're going to look like is a workshop on various communication modes within a professional digital setting. So the 3 main topics that we're going to be talking about today are email etiquette and how we can sort of start to structure that. Identifying the differences between internal and external written communications, and then talking through some video communication strategies. So the way that Jordan and I sort of talked about this beforehand is that with these 3 sections, there's going to be small section breaks. And if you have questions, and I think it'll just be more engaging of a workshop if we stop at each of the 3 stops there. So if you have questions that come up and you want to ask them, please feel free to. We can also feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll make it known when we get to the point where we're going to break for questions. So thank you again. Hopefully you get something out of this. So the first thing so within the 3 main categories of this workshop, I thought breaking each of them down into 3 smaller subtopics would be a little bit helpful here. So for each of them, we're going to talk about what it is, define what the term is that we're talking about, why it's important for you to develop in your professional skill set, and then talk about how to implement it specifically within your, you know, your day-to-day interactions in your work from home capacity. So when we're talking about email etiquette, we're really talking about the code of conduct you should use when writing or responding to emails. I apologize if the definitions are a little obvious, especially when we get to video communication. It's going to be very obvious. But so it's really, the way I want to break this down is to present it as this mode of structure, which is this mode of communication, which is structure focused as opposed to content focused. So what I mean when we say it's structure focused, the things that we're going to talk about, the strategies we're going to talk about for email etiquette are not here's the word choice that you should use in your emails. You know, in the second workshop, we'll talk a little bit about tone, and we'll talk about intent in writing, and recognizing appropriate audience expectations in your writing. But for today, it's really about how to structure a proper email so that you can sort of fill in the gaps eventually. But it's one of those things where, from a learning perspective, it's much easier to learn the general rules before you move on to the more specific things. And that's what we're going to be talking about here, is the general structure, because once you have that, the proper form is bound to follow. And also, when we talk about things, when we talk about modes of communication, it's sort of you don't really want to define communication in the field of communication because it limits what it actually can be. They're often very broad topics that are going to have like really specific situations which arise where you're going to be using them. And because the definitions are broad, I do like to say, I do want to define what email etiquette is not, or what we're not looking at email etiquette as. And one thing that I think is just really important is that email etiquette is often conflated with business writing, which is often, or professional writing, which is really often conflated with practices of standard white English, as opposed to a more inclusive language and dialect and diction. And back for the job application series, we're going to talk about this in a lot more detail, but it really is a practice of understanding that there are sort of inherent racial barriers in the language that we use. And so primarily the reason why I'm trying to structure this definition as structural in nature as opposed to content in nature is because the limiting nature of what the content can and can't be inherently comes with those sorts of racial barriers. And so I think it's important to just address that, and we can move forward with that understanding. And so again, if we're thinking about it as what email etiquette is and how it's sort of, we're going to be looking at it, it's really the outline as opposed to the filling, it's the structure as opposed to the content. And so when we come back in the second workshop, we'll really talk in more detail about how to fill an email with proper tone and language without being too limiting in what that is. So now that we have that long definition of what email etiquette is, we can talk about why it's important and why we're talking about it today. And really, when you think about this, it's just, especially when we are so limited in the modes in which we can communicate now, right? You lose face-to-face interaction with this work from home environment a lot of the times. At best, we have video conferences like we're doing now, but it is, objectively not the same. And so when you're practicing email etiquette, you really are embodying your whole ethos as a speaker, as a professional within those individual emails. And so it's really, really important to send every email as an important email because it's crucial to presenting yourself as a qualified individual. In our second section of this night, we're going to talk about the differences between recognizing internal and external audiences and sort of how to write to that. But when we talk about email etiquette, it really isn't situational in nature. So when I say that, what I mean is you should practice email etiquette regardless of who you are sending an email to, and the rules that we're going to go over apply to every email. And we'll look at an example, a couple of examples that hopefully outline what I mean by that and how it looks in practice. As in terms of how an email should be structured, I have eight pieces of an email that I think are just important in any email that you send, regardless of who it is addressed to or what the content is of that email. So first and foremost, a proper email address. So when practicing this sort of structural etiquette, it's important to be working with an appropriate email address. Again, this is something that we'll bring up in a later workshop when we talk about like job applications. But if you're representing an organization, right, you want to be sure that you're if you're representing an organization, you want to make sure that you are using your given email address for that specific organization, right? I assume the employees of the YWCA here all have specific YWCA email addresses. Whenever you're communicating in a capacity as a professional, you should be using that as opposed to a personal email address. If you don't have a organizational email address, then using a personal email address is totally fine. It's just, you want to be sure that that is also professional, and general rule here is that your name is totally fine and acceptable, and Gmail or AOL.com, MSN.com, whatever that is a totally fine and appropriate email address. And so if you are representing, another thing I think is important to talk about with the email address here is that as a representative of your organization, and this is something we'll talk about in more detail in just a moment, you are going to be bound to the rules of conduct for your respective organization in terms of what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to do within your professional capacity. And so you want to make sure that, again, if you're using an email address that's specific to your position, your organization, you just want to make sure that you are following all codes of conduct. Okay. And then as far as, so after the email address, you want to make sure that you have a clear and straightforward subject line. So again, every email that you send should have a subject line. When I was doing research for this, I found that the number of characters that people suggest having in a subject line, I saw 60 characters, so 60 numbers or letters or spaces or dashes, which makes more sense to me, but another source said 14, which seems a little short. The point is to say that short and sweet and a clear overview of what your purpose is for the email is your best bet here. So whatever whatever it is that you have to say, if you think about it as a recipient as opposed to a writer, you want to make sure that you understand what you're getting into when you go to open an email. It also helps for organizational purposes in terms of within your inbox, it's easier to organize with a clear subject line there as well. So make sure, again, every email that you have has a subject line. As far as a greeting, you want to open every email once you get to the actual text box. So you have the recipient and then the subject line, and then you have the text box of the email. You want to make sure that every email that you send has a greeting. These can range in formality or specificity. Something as simple as hello or hi is totally acceptable, right? Good morning, how are you? If you know who your specific audience is, including their name and their title is also important, right? If Dr. Smith, good morning, Dr. Smith. Again, it is less about the content in which you're using to fill this in, and much more about the structure and making sure you're hitting the beats of those structures. And so again, just a greeting, it will depend and vary based on your audience, but making sure that you have one is always critical here. As far as an introduction goes, so the introduction should really briefly lay out the reason for your email in a sentence or two. So straightforward, to the point, but clear and concise, and in a way that again, elaborates a little bit more on what you put in the subject line, and so that your audience has a clear idea of what the purpose is of them reading this email, what they need to do, what action they need to take, or what information they need to consume based on that. After an introduction, you want to make sure that you have clear body paragraphs if necessary. So body paragraphs are designed to provide more detail to the topic listed in your introduction. So they should also be to the point and provide your audience with any additional information. So this is where you provide details. If you're arranging a meeting, this is where you would list the date and times of the meeting. This is where you would specify who's going to be in the meeting. This is where you make arrangements for where it would take place, a Zoom link, I guess, in the modern age. But so that's where any relevant information should be listed in the body paragraphs there. You want to make sure that you have a conclusion. So your conclusion should really look to refocus the main purpose of the message. and really take a step forward by providing a clear action step for your audience to take, or sort of like arrange next steps for the current process. So, it could be as simple as respond when you get a sec, when you have the time, feel free to respond, give me a call. Looking forward to speaking with you on blank. Again, the content really is going to range and can range, but just making sure that you have this is really important for developing strong email etiquette. You want to make sure that you have a brief closing, just a brief, polite way to end the correspondence. Best, yours truly, thank you, etc. Again, nothing. I think my go-to is always best. For some reason, it's just a personal preference, I guess. But these things are just, markers of a clearly developed, well-developed email here. And then finally, you want to just end with a signature. So your formal email signature is something that you should make for all of your professional correspondence. I'm not sure if the YWCA requires it, but if they do, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's really just a simple process that with any email application, so if you use Outlook or Gmail, for example, you can create a signature, and you can just, for every email that you send, you can have it default so that the signature will appear, or you can just click a quick button in the toolbar of your email service provider, and you will be able to input the signature there. And that should be the ending of all correspondences. And your signature should include your full name and your title, your organization, your relevant contact information, really specifically for the organization. If you have a direct phone line or an extension, you should include that as well. And then pronouns, which is becoming much more common to include your pronouns in your email signatures. So contrary to what I'm doing in describing this process, really brevity is the important thing in email etiquette, right? You want to be able to convey the information as straightforward and as quickly as possible for your audience, without inundating them with information, but sharing all necessary information. And so again, the next slide I'm going to show is to just sort of emphasize the differences between structure versus content. I think these two sort of work to do just that. So the smaller email on stage right, I guess my left, this one over here, if you can see my cursor, is just an extension of, I revised an email that I sent to Jordan to just make it fake. But you can see here that regardless of how small it is, this email follows all of those 8 guidelines. So it has a proper email address, which is my university email address. It has a subject line, which is a very brief and concise overview of what this email is going to entail. So this fake email is about our workshop tonight. A greeting, again, doesn't have to be super formal, but just make sure that the greeting is there. So hi, Jordan. An introduction. So I wanted to follow up regarding Wednesday's workshop. So again, just sort of going off of what the subject line is, but providing a little bit more detail and giving your audience a clear sense of what they should be doing for this, what they should be expecting to learn through reading this. And then quick body paragraph. Do you want me to type up a fake example of an email for the presentation? And then conclusion, please feel free to email me or call with the answer. Quick closing, best, again, that's my thing there. And then my signature, which I use for my UMass email address. So again, when we're talking about the fact that this structure should remain, this structure is not situational, right? So regardless of what the email contains, you should have all 8 of these elements within your email. And again, so this is I will not read this in all of it, but you can see that content-wise, there's much more to this other email. So this is a real email that I work at our tutoring center at UMass as well. And so this is somebody who was asking for information about it. So it's where the MCC, that's the name of our tutoring center, info follow-up. So again, it's direct and to the point. This is what the email is going to have. Good afternoon. I took their name out just for privacy reasons, but it has, their name in the real email. Just a quick, this is a little bit more of this is the last thing we talked about, but the intro here is really, I wanted to follow up about the information for the tutoring center. Here's the body paragraphs, which are going over those specific details. quick conclusion. The call for action here being, if you have any questions, just to let me know. Conclusion, and then end with the signature there. So again, hopefully these examples sort of articulate that regardless of the recipient, regardless of the purpose of the email, this is really just like if you're working to sort of like build the muscles of strong communication practices, these are the sort of steps that you should be taking to really refine your email etiquette there. Okay, so I have now talked through the first of three here. I think it could be a good time to pause if anyone has any questions or wants to add to the discussion.
Josh, hi, Jordan here. I just want to jump in for a second because I love the way you design or discuss like the body of the email. And I would say like this is a great opportunity to remind your reader what you're talking about, right? Like providing that context, what you're referring to, and not just leaving it as like, yes. Well, yes, what, right? Like, can you give me, and I say this only because, right, as we're living in this digital world, the emails are constant and how we're organizing them, and it helps. I don't know if you want to speak more to that or if I'm on the wrong track there, but I'm thinking like it just, having that context helps, in terms of your bandwidth to know exactly what one's talking about.
So in the real example here, you can see that in action. And so this is specifically, there was, for context so that you understand where I was coming from with this email. So the recipient and I had previously met via Zoom, and we had talked about the Upward Bound program, which is a program at UMass Dartmouth, and ways that we're going to collaborate in the future. And within the meeting, the recipient had asked about the tutoring center that she could send her students to so that they could utilize it. Because COVID is going on, all of our sessions are online, and so it sort of just makes like another barrier of what students have to do to make the appointment. So I just wanted to make sure that she had all the information that she could sort of dictate to her students so that they were clear on what the process was for signing up for a tutoring session and how to do that. So if you look at the body here, again, because this isn't, if this was Jordan and I were exchanging emails about when we were going to meet up again, this is where those specific details would be. If this was about a specific task that needed to be completed, this is where the details of that task would be. So, for this, I'd like you to do A, B, and C, and each A, B, and C can be their own respective body paragraphs. But because this is just a follow-up of a meeting, we have examples here of, here are some introductory resources to send along. So here's, the scheduling platform that I have linked there as well, along with a YouTube video about how to register and make an appointment. And then along with that, I talked about sort of the virtual nature of our sessions and how the different modes that they can go about doing it. So they can do like half-hour, hour-long sessions, and they can be face-to-face by audio or just through the text chat. And so to what I think you were asking me to speak about, Jordan, like if this recipient waited a week to look at this email, they would be able to know all of the relevant details that they would need to get out of this email. Now, if the shorter email, which has a much clearer action step, and it has a much more pressing deadline, it's also fake. But the real emails that Jordan and I exchanged today are direct and action oriented, and very specific to what was building for tonight. But again, I think it's important to stress what you were just mentioning, Jordan, is that these as documents of record should be something that your audience can and should be able to go back to without the immediate context of the last conversation that you had, and still be able to have all of that relevant information and relevant details. You don't need to say it was so great having that muffin and cup of coffee with you, those are irrelevant details there. But, as far as like what actions need to be taken, that's what you really want to make sure that you include in these. Questions? Anything anyone wants to say before we move on? So that's going to bring us to our next discussion. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk even more about this one because I think there's a lot of nuances to this that I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on as we go through this. So I really want to talk about the differences between internal and external communication. This is one of those definitions, like I said, that's really obvious, but we're going to go over them together and sort of explain a little bit more of the details of them because I think it's important to understand and have a clear sense of. So internal communication, right, is any active communication between yourself and a member of your company or organization or groups within your organization. External communication, on the other hand, is any active communication between yourself and an audience outside of your company or organization. So again, if the majority of people here are YWCA staff, right, anyone within YWCA staff in the organization would count as internal. Anyone outside of that, even if it's communicating with a friend or a professional associate outside of that, is technically external communication. So modes of communication can take place in a range of modes. So what I mean by that is you can exchange emails or phone calls or video calls, text messages. In the before times you could do face-to-face interactions, anything like that. But what's important to recognize with the two modes of communication are just sort of how widely your audiences can vary. And recognizing that audience understanding is really crucial to the way that you communicate, and really even like the mode that you communicate will be dictated by who your audience is. And so having a clear sense of who it is that you're communicating with is a really, really strong first step to executing the differences and the nuances of these two modes of communication, these two general practices of communication effectively. So again, that's sort of the definition and why it's important that we're talking about this. So unlike email etiquette, understanding the differences between internal and external communication is in fact a matter of understanding situational writing. So like email etiquette, understanding these differences when it comes is important in terms of like presenting yourself as a trusted professional. But really where the differences lie are that, again, regardless of what your email is or who you're sending it to or what the content is, you should always follow those same guidelines of email etiquette. You may add more content to it, but you should always have an introduction. You should always have a signature and a conclusion, things like that. But when it comes to, again, these modes of communication, you're going to be in a position where you have to make judgment calls based on your experiences and based on best established practices. And it's a lot more, there's a lot more to it. And so I guess when we get into the how here. So a couple of things that I just want to point out before we get into the discussion of internal and external communication. So I will not pretend to tell you that we can go over all of the differences and all of the approaches that you should take in these modes of communication in the 15, 20 minutes or so that we're going to talk about them in the session. And so again, I think I'm trying to approach this from a more structural point of view in terms of here is the tools that you can take so that you can take actionable steps in your communication practices, which are helpful to both presenting yourself properly and meeting the needs of your audience and recognizing what they need from you and how they need you to act in whatever situation that you find yourself in. So in terms of how to go about, recognizing those realities from an internal communication point of view, the first thing that should be brought up, and again, I kind of mentioned this with email etiquette. More likely than not, if you're working in a professional capacity, you are going to be working within an organization that has specific codes of conduct related to their standards for communication practices. So regardless of whatever I say tonight, you should always defer to whatever it is your organization has. And so, within most orientation practices, Jordan, do you all have codes of conduct for your communication practices at YWCA?
Not that I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the
handbook or whatever.
Right, the employee handbook. But I think this is something we are discussing now that we're going on a year of working remotely, and really making sure that we have clear communication expectations. Absolutely. But I agree with you here, like always being respectful. That would absolutely be in the code of conduct and things like that.
So there are always going to be expectations that within a workplace you're acting professionally, you're acting with respect, you're ensuring that you're treating your other coworkers, respectfully and professionally, and within the guidelines of most professional sort of codes of conduct with communication, there's also like more clandestine things that you should just keep in mind and always be mindful of. So for example, some of them will dictate what you can post on social media in your professional capacity. The most will limit your ability to share political opinions within the so I'm just going to say like a lot of work is done over like Microsoft Teams, so like you can't share political opinions over the Microsoft Teams accounts that you have, for example, or in Zoom calls or anything like that. And those codes of conduct will be monitored and could be scrutinized. And the very fact that we are now in a position where the majority of what our interactions are taking place are taking place over the internet, which is it has implications of permanence with it. And so anything that you have, I don't want to say like it's going to be taken out of context and you're not going to be able to defend yourself, but you are in a position where intent is irrelevant here, and it's just what's on the page that is really important to keep in mind. And so things like sarcasm or jokes don't transfer really well in this sort of medium, especially not in text, and especially not when texts can and often are void of context and void of your pre-existing relationships and things like that. And again, this is not to defend any sort of like disrespectful or wrong behavior. That is not what I mean at all. That should be definitely punishable. But this is just in terms of a mindfulness of what you are saying and how you are presenting yourself. Because again, we're just in a reality right now where everything that I'm saying right now is getting recorded, and it's going to be available for other people to watch. And all the PowerPoint slides that we put together are going to be there for people to look at in the future and use against me, I guess. But so it's just keep, as we talk about internal communication styles and internal communication strategies, just keep those things in mind. Those more general practices that always defer to what your organization's expectations are of yourself and of the way that you present yourself. And always just keep in mind, right, like we are operating in mediums that are permanent and should be treated that way. Okay. So as far as, so again, I mentioned at the top of this section that there's just like too many situations to get into specifically about how and why you should sort of like communicate the way that you are. But really, if we're looking at it structurally, the structure of internal communication comes down to two main factors. It comes down to the mode of communication, so how you're speaking with that person. So if it's text messages or voicemails or emails or video calls or whatever face-to-face interactions. And then it comes down to the audience. So your audience could be a longtime coworker or a manager or the head of your organization or a brand new employee, right? And I think I got most of the main groups, but anywhere in between there, right? And so what's important to keep in mind is that different audiences will have different standards for how they see fit as appropriate communication. I'll just give you a quick example from my own personal life. In addition to UMass, I work with like COVID relief with the CDC right now, and we have one individual who the first time our group of new hires got an email from her, our boss had to come and like talk to us and just be like, "Oh yeah, that's blank, you know, she's not really good with email etiquette, and so she's very short, and it comes off as very mean and very demoralizing, and like you're not doing the job well." And so if that is the situation, what I would say is that if you are talking through email to a brand new employee, you should be mindful of the fact that these people could be nervous, or still learning or working through the stress of coming to a new position. And so sort of like going out of the way to whatever is probably a good, I'm not just using this to vent about that, I swear, but in general practices, it could be good. As opposed to just the reality that like the people that you work with become your friends, right? And you could text your friends that are also your work associates about the TV show that you are both watching. And that's a very low stakes, low key sort of interaction there, right? The way that you are interacting with a friend over text message, even if it, during work hours, is much different than the way you should draft a formal email to your boss. Again, use the email etiquette scaffolding that we talked about in the past. But that also comes down to tone. That comes down to the formality or informality of what that communication looks like. And so having that clear sense of who it is that you're writing to, and again, to say like you could have a shorthand with a specific employee that you work with to be able to say, you write your emails that just say, hey, got your email, it's taken care of, thanks, bye, and that's enough, and that is totally fine. But it is, again, like I know I'm stressing it a lot, but it is situational awareness. It's recognizing what the time and the place is, and what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. With that in mind, I think hopefully that gives a pretty significant understanding of this difference here. So the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of internal communication is just sort of a reality that wherever you go to work, you are going to have to learn a new culture and a new shorthand and sort of a new jargon, right? Regardless of, so jargon we'll put on hold for just a moment, but in terms of culturally, something that I stress to my students all the time, especially when they're nervous about applying for jobs, and something that we're going to talk about in the workshop about job interviews specifically, is that the vetting process for a job, especially when you get to the interview process, is not are you qualified for the job, but it's are you a good fit for the culture of this organization. Most hiring managers look at it that way, that they're bringing you in because on paper you're, so long as you weren't like lying in your resume, which we're going to talk about not doing, but so long as you weren't lying on your resume, right? Like if you're brought in for an interview, you're qualified for the job on paper. What they're trying to check is like, do they have a similar sense of humor or disposition? Are they a team lead? Are they the buzzwords of like a go-getter, or are they someone who's just gonna, who's qualified on paper, but sort of, takes more of a backseat and lets others do the work? They're trying to suss out who you are as an individual as opposed to who you are as a professional. And so the reason I bring that up there is because, and I'm sure everyone that's working in a professional capacity right now, right, is in a position where you are either already accustomed to or currently learning the shorthand of your organizations. And so this is just, again, this can be as small as like inside jokes, or this can be not severe, but like knowing that this person sends mean emails regardless of who the person is, the recipient is. And so recognizing that like that's just, it's something that we get used to here, right? Don't get used to everything. If something is wrong or abusive, do something about it, talk to someone about it. But that's not this talk here. And then the other thing, right, is that you are going to have to get used to the jargon that is specific to your position. So again, look, another personal example. So in the public health position that I work in, with public health, there's acronyms galore. I got into public health during COVID, so I am not formally trained in it. And I am overwhelmed by how many acronyms you have to learn in the field of public health. That is specific to the jargon, right? If you are in law or in medicine or in community relations, there are accompanying, it's a cultural language, right? Like you have to figure out what people are saying very quickly and understanding what that is in order to get into that culture, to be ingrained in that culture, to be accepted in the culture, and to really like succeed and excel within that culture. You have to understand the shorthand or the jargon as it goes along. So that is in a nutshell internal communication. Again, just very structurally, right? Like because we can't walk through every scenario, and because in the second workshop we are going to talk about tone and more specific audience awareness and diction and language choice. For now, I want to leave it at the fact that recognize the mode of communication through which you're talking, right? Because a text message should look different than an email. A video call and a voicemail should be a little bit different. You know, a low stakes face-to-face interaction should be different than a video call. And so recognizing sort of the culture of your organization for which you're working and meeting those needs and meeting those sorts of expectations is really key here. And then the other thing is just recognizing, you know, who you're talking to, because that's also another big part of this is, you know, a relationship with something like a long-standing relationship with someone, you really should be talking to them differently than an organizational head or a manager or a new employee. And then, so the long-winded internal is as short-winded as external is, because external communication is pretty simple for our structural standpoint. External communication is something that you should treat, it's really not as situational as internal communication. Basically, the important thing to keep in mind is that anytime you are speaking or writing to someone who is not a member of your organization, you are an ambassador, a representative, a figurehead of that organization. And so it's just really, really important that you are always presenting yourself professionally for that audience. I think it's unfair, but the unfair reality of it is that the outside world, the external audience to which you're addressing, will judge your organization based on you if you're the only point of contact they've ever had with that organization. And so if you, for example, send a short sort of tactless email, even if your intentions were just like, oh, but I just really wanted to get the information to them really quickly. And again, like the intent there is irrelevant, and you're in a situation now where you have, upset a person and turn them off to your organization. And so again, just really important to, I would say, within a situation where you are, reaching out to an external audience, practicing external communication of any kind, which again is, like when you go to like a Zoom workshop and you are saying that you are, I keep going with the YWCA. I apologize if there are people here not from the YWCA, but like if you're a member of the YWCA, you are a representative of them. And so the way that you act within that Zoom meeting or conference is reflective of your organization and what they value and sort of their practices. So I would say the general rule there for external communication then is, not exercise caution, but exercise formality. The more formal, the better for this. Okay. All right. That is my internal versus external communication segment. I'm happy to pause and answer questions, have a discussion.
Yeah, but thanks, Josh. And good. I'm glad you're able to take a water break. If anybody has any questions, feel free to come off of mute. You can put the messages in the chat, or you could send me a message. Um, yeah.
But we have definitely part of the after this last section, we have some time for more or less formal Q&A and stuff, discussion. So okay, so with that said, the last of our 3 sections for today is talking about sort of developing video communication skills. This is the most obvious definition, so I apologize. I tried to bolster it a little bit with some more specific examples. But video communication is the process of using audio and video software to communicate. So it's what we're doing right now. It's what I'm sure in a work from home capacity you do several times a day. It's specifics and the challenges of this in just a second. So working from home or remotely has really increased a reliance on video communication softwares. Again, I don't think this is news to anyone, but these are things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Discord or Skype or FaceTime, basically any medium in which you're doing the Jetsons thing of the video calls here. And then, the ways in which these sorts of technologies have been used have really increased exponentially in the last year, where now they're being used to hold routine meetings, negotiate business deals, conduct interviews, basically hold workshops in the evenings, anything like that. Why it's really important to get a sense to work through this. I think like the running through line with each of these, this is a workshop about professional communication. So learning how to handle Zoom etiquette is important to developing your skills as a professional communicator, and showing your audience you have oh no, my headphones are dying. You are respectful during these presentations and things like that. But I think more importantly is that video communication is sort of the closest I think a lot of us get in a work from home setting to a sense of normalcy. A colleague of mine at UMass has been telling all of her students for the last 3 semesters that like this isn't normal. We don't want to get used to this. I stress the fact that like we will be face to face soon enough. But I just think the reality for a lot of people is that this is going to be a more normal practice, even if it's a hybrid work from home, work in an office, a few days a week doing either or. And so I think it's an opportunity to reclaim some of that, and Zoom fatigue is real, right? Like looking at a computer screen is obviously not the same as being in a room with someone and actually communicating with them. And of course, you lose a lot of the nuances of communication with a video conference like this, right? You lose body language. You lose, just as a teacher, I've been doing live classes this semester for the first time, and most of my classes are just me and 20 black screens. And so, in a classroom, if a blank screen is fine, I recognize that there are definite like socioeconomic issues about like bringing other people into your home, and there's a lot of challenges beyond just I'm having a bad hair day, but like in a classroom, I can see nonverbal cues of affirmation or confusion or anger or whatever, and that can really help to sort of guide and direct my strategies for that particular lesson plan. And it allows me to sort of adapt on the fly. And when you lose that with video communication like this, you're really left in a position where, for both the presenter, and if you've probably noticed, I'll talk regardless, so it doesn't matter, but I'll keep going. But like you'll probably run in a position where it could be awkward or uncomfortable or not as engaging or fulfilling for the presenter, but also like the attendees. And so I think like working through these strategies and getting to a point where you're comfortable participating in, like, I'm just going to say Zoom as the default because I think that's what we've all been using. Comfortable working and actively participating in a Zoom environment is really going to help, again, like reclaim a little bit of the normalcy that we've lost in this work from home. So I think that's why it's important. I think that's why I'm going to push hard for everyone to sort of like work through these practices here. With that in mind, the how for this section, I put together a list of do's and don'ts, which there's academic scholarship that's been written about this yet. I'm sure we're in for a tidal wave in a couple of years, but for now, it's really like listicles and BuzzFeed articles that I'm stuck with. So I've tried to make these do's and don'ts from my own specific experiences that I've had over the last year. So again, in both of my positions, I lead these sorts of workshops on a fairly regular basis, or classes on a fairly regular basis. And I'm also in the audience for my other position on a fairly regular basis. And so these are just things that I've seen other people do and I've done myself that I think lead to a more engaging and enriching dialogue within these sorts of things. So one thing that you do want to make sure that you do in all, again, Zoom meetings here is to test out your audio and video before a meeting. So whether this is the curated background that you have, or creating a background for yourself, or using a green screen, or blurring out yourself, just make sure that I think I talked about this in a couple sections, but you want to make sure that you're in an environment in which you are, if you are put on the spot and asked to put your camera on, you're in a good place, or if you're put on the spot and you're asked to contribute something through audio, your audience can hear you and can understand you clearly. Another thing that the reason I have my headphones on right now instead of just talking, someone in my neighborhood was using a power drill for, it seemed like 4 hours before this. So I didn't want to have a dull hum the whole time that we were talking here. So there are, of course, like, we're in a position that living in a home, and there are sounds and children and pets and dogs and all those wonderful things about working from home that disrupt these sorts of meetings. And I don't think anyone is ever going to be on your case about that, or so depending on the formality of the situation. I think I think we all have learned over the last year that, like, this is not the best of environments to be holding these sorts of things, and so let's do our best to be respectful here and just make sure that you have your things are functioning. Anyway, so the next do here, you always, thank you everyone. This is like the first Zoom meeting I've attended where everybody's been muted, so you're great. I appreciate it all. You usually have the dog barking or something, or the power drill in the background. So you just always do want to make sure that you're muted when you're not speaking. It's just, even something is like, I'm not going to click, but like this is a keyboard and that's really loud. Hopefully you heard it, but it could be really loud because our microphones are really, really good. Our technology is very strong, so that if you're in a position where even if you're just texting, your fingertips as they are making pitter patter on your screen can be something that's distracting for the speaker. So general rule of thumb, just until you're speaking, just make sure that you're muted. My personal preference, again, I say share your video if you're comfortable. Again, I totally understand that there is a very not inclusion, but there's a very we're getting into your home life in a way that people are not used to sharing or being comfortable with. And I totally understand that. And if you're not comfortable with sharing a video, a recommendation I would give would be to upload a profile image onto, if it's Zoom that you primarily use for your professional accounts here, just upload a photo of yourself on your Zoom profile. again, like from a presenter point of view, it's just nicer to see faces as opposed to black screens. Again, like you don't make up for all of it, but you make up for some of the lag in body language and the ability to dance. Um, Another do is to participate. Again, like as from both the point of view of a presenter and an audience member, the better um, Zoom meetings, workshops, lectures, classes are the ones that have engaged participants. And part of that is definitely on the responsibility of the presenter to make sure that there's a room to have participation, but b like an environment that's welcoming to individuals to participate. And so don't be afraid. I'll tell you now, most people will really appreciate it if you ask questions and sort of engage the dialogue and push the conversation forward. So that's, and then also, I hope that I'm never in a position where I'm like, here's how you can get ahead, because I just don't think that that's like a good strategy to live your life by. But like, very practically, if somebody is seeing your face and talking to you constantly over and over again, it is beneficial to you in a professional capacity to say like, oh, Josh has his video on all the time and he nods in agreement, even though he doesn't know what I'm saying or whatever. And so it is, personally, the students that have participated in my classes and have, asked questions and shown their video are the ones that I remember. And just, unfortunately, it's not a normal semester where I know all my students' names and faces by the second week, but like we're in a position now where I just can't, like I physically don't know how to get my students' names, but I know, the 6 of them that show up with their cameras on and ask questions. So I guess going off of that, ask questions either verbally or in the chat. Most of the Zoom workshops I've been to have encouraged chat questions for the Q&A section, so that you don't forget, or you make sure that your point is asked there. So it's a good way to participate and engage. Listen to and engage with the meeting. That's not something on like my point, but I think like in other meetings that you go to, you'll probably get something out of it. If the meeting is not meant to be an email, you could probably get something out of it professionally or personally. And so I've definitely been don't get me wrong. I moved during April and I was working from home, and many of the meetings that I had, I threw my headphones on and put my phone in my pocket and I packed boxes into my car. That was a very bad way to participate with a meeting and engage with a meeting. So I recommend not doing that. I've since stopped doing that, but there. Another thing, I've seen a couple people do it throughout the night. So you have good Zoom etiquette already. So turn off your camera if you need to get up, right? Any sort of sudden movement is kind of distracting to the presenter, especially if like noise is made at the same time and your Zoom face pops up. And I don't think there's anyone that's going to fault you for turning the camera off for whatever reason, but just etiquette for that. If possible, find a quiet space. Again, we've kind of already talked about the realities of just there are noises that exist in the world. But if you can't find a quiet space, headphones are a good option if available. Feel free to blur or add a photo to your background. So green screens, or I think Zoom, I'm giving the Zoom etiquette, but I'm not great on like the nuances of Zoom, but I know that you have the opportunity to blur your full background out. So in case you don't want anyone to see into your home, it's a definite option that could give you, your face can still participate, even though your home doesn't. And then Jordan just told me about this, which is the best thing that I've ever done, is hiding your self view, which is an option. So if you click on your 3 little dots in your picture, you can hide your self view and you won't need to look at yourself awkwardly in the Zoom window for the entire duration of the meeting. It's changed my life. I'm much more attentive in this presentation than I would be if I was just staring at myself and looking at how awkward I look about everything the entire time for this presentation. So I would recommend that. So, and then, just a couple of things to not do within these meetings. Don't unmute yourself accidentally. I'm sure we've all seen the news stories of the people who have been doing things that they shouldn't be doing during Zoom meetings, and then they accidentally mute themselves, and then the toilet flushes or whatever. Make sure that you, I would say, like, don't come in and out of the meeting willy-nilly. Again, like, we're in a position where anything can happen at any moment. So if you have to leave, obviously it's good. But um, you know, especially in closed workshops like this, your entering and exiting will be, you leave and then you come in and it's like, oh, this person's in the waiting room, and it's just a distraction for presenters there. And then, of course, don't interrupt other speakers. This one is, of course, obvious in terms of like just general manners, but there's also, I found it as an audience member in the, the hundreds of Zoom meetings that I've had now in the past year or so. It's super uncomfortable to be the first one to speak, but it's even more uncomfortable to be the first two to speak simultaneously. And then you're in a position where it's like, you're at a four-way stop, and like you let the guy go, and then you go, and then you stop, and then and it's that awkward exchange. And so it's just sort of like the unfortunate reality of Zoom that these things are probably going to happen. And so, stopping yourself and holding your question and letting the other person speak first. And again, I know someone has to speak first, but just that sort of, don't let that discourage you from speaking or participating, because it's, again, I think the one thing that everyone should take from this is, no matter how equipped a presenter seems to be, I think the general rule for everyone right now is like, this is uncomfortable, and this is not how people are designed to interact with one another. And so there's going to be those awkward sorts of exchanges, and we'll embrace the awkwardness, and hopefully go back to work sometime soon. But and so those are my hows for that. Couple things, a couple things, I guess, to just summarize. So, just important things to like always follow your organization specific codes of conduct. Just make sure that you are aware of that. And, just the general rule with all these sorts of modes of conduct is being respectful, being conscientious of others around you. And then also, recognizing that the permanency of your words as they exist in a digital space, and recognizing that you should always be mindful of that. Even if it takes a second, like, I think it's going to be a good thing in the long run of things, where people think through what they say the first, instead of just like blurting it out the first time. But I think we're going to be in a position where you are currently in a position where you should just be mindful of what you're saying. Again, internal communication is a little bit more nuanced than external communication. It's really about how you're communicating and with whom you're communicating. So just keep those things in mind as you practice strong internal communication skills. Respect, just treating your community and those around you with respect is just the golden rule here. Learn shorthand as you see fit. It will help you fit in. It'll help you sort of grow within your organization. And sort of just remember that in all forms of communication, you are sort of an ambassador or a representative of your organization. And so it's just important to keep that in mind as you move forward, in this position and any other positions you may have in the future. How does my talking for the night? I'll answer questions, but with my presentation wrapped up, I am more than happy to have discussions, feedback, questions, whatever.
Thank you, Josh. Maybe, if everyone can find their reaction button, who here would agree that like communicating effectively in the virtual space matters? And how we do it matters, right? Good. Seeing people engaging with the reactions. I think this is a great, right, we've gone over an hour. We we really appreciate you all being here. We will, this is being recorded, so we will share this, particularly if, you want to come back to any of this information, and Josh and I can be available for follow-up, for any questions that you might have. But, I think we can all take something away. If you want to put in the chat, maybe something new that you learned about. Oh, I like this. Josh, maybe you could help with this question in the chat. What about thank you messages? Yes or no?
I mean, in terms of like sending thank you messages through email?
Yes, I mean, you send an email out to a bunch of folks and you get 10 thank yous back, which I find annoying. But I think, what is that, courtesy? Or I read somewhere that thank you is not necessary for each message.
I totally agree with you. I think it's one of those things that's probably a little bit more situational. If you're being CC'd in an email with more than like 5 people, you probably, and unless there is like a direct call for a response, you probably don't need to do that. You probably don't need to send a thank you message. And if you do, I would, you're welcome for that self-view. That was Jordan. So thanks, Jordan, for that. As far as thank you messages go, I think a big thing that everyone can take from this is don't reply all to large emails. Sorry, I should have said this before. So there's a difference between reply and reply all. So in your question, I think you're gonna get, are you referencing like you get thank you emails from 10 other people?
No, I guess I don't know that specifically, but when I've sent something to someone that they were expecting and it's just routine and I don't need a thank you.
I think you're right. I think thank yous can probably be done away with unless there's like more that you're adding in terms of like content.
I think if there's something that someone has done that's exceptional, that wasn't necessary, that wasn't asked for, but in a routine, let's get something done, kind of email connect back and forth. I find a thank you one or two more steps at having to open open an email again to see if there's anything else, or I just wish that everyone was clear about the use of thank you, I think.
Totally agree with you. And I think, if you have like in Microsoft Teams, there's, and in like Apple's, you can react to messages. You can just like give it a little thumbs up. I wish that you could do that in emails, just as like a confirmation of like, oh, I got this, thanks. And it's sort of like universally said. So I would say, I think to your point, I think you're right. I think it creates a situation in which if you are in a position where like a task was completed and you need to confirm the fact that you know that the task is done, I would say yes, send a thank you, because it's less a thank you and more just like a, I got it. And again, in like that situation, you, in following like the email structure that we went over, you would still have like the email and the subject line and you would lose like a body paragraph, which I think would be totally fine for that situation. But yeah, I think if it is confirming that a task has been completed and you have to recognize the fact that that task is completed, I would say yeah. But if it was like, I don't know, I got you sent, thanks very much, I don't think you need to send a thank you.
So I'll give you an example. I sent out an email telling everybody that Zoom meetings have set up and they're going to be scheduled and regular and period. I don't need a thank you from the 10 people that I sent that email to.
Agreed. Yes, I don't think you do either.
Okay.
But Josh, I'm really glad you brought up the point about communicating to acknowledge when tasks have been completed. Like, this is a COVID world, so knowing that you can't shout across the office or the cubicle or like, it's all set, it's on your desk. There has to be a way to let people know that like these tasks are being completed and in a timely fashion. And I like, I like that Google sometimes has even the canned responses like all set, just like this task is completed. And I think that's more for internal. I would never do that externally. That would be a more professional email because like you're saying, you are representing the organization and being thorough and detailed, but internally, like sending those receipts, like task completed, thank you. So yeah.
And I think that like, oh, I'm sorry if somebody was, oh, I think it also speaks to like shorthand, right? Like if you have a shorthand with your coworkers to know like, hey, I'm gonna send out this Zoom email, don't respond. It's okay, you don't need to respond to this. And then, I think that again, like we're all in a position where we're learning here and adapting to these new challenges. And so just being open and honest with one another about it, like, hey, thanks so much. I appreciate you sending this email, but like in the future, don't even worry about it. I don't need you to know this.
Thank you, Josh. I'm glad that we're talking about the cameras as well. And I think it's great that tonight, like you're attending a workshop, there's no need for the cameras to be on, but particularly when you think of internal and external communications, when you have a camera on, like Josh saying, like you're just talking to a blank screen. You can't read off emotion. Like I can't see how one, or I'm not trying to make this personal, but somebody needs to be able to read off how you're emoting in order to, because I think we know in that with communication is where relationships break down. That if you think of all the ways you can put those steps in place of like, my camera's on, I'm here, I'm present, I'm not multitasking, I'm giving her my full attention. Like, I don't know, Josh, if that's kind of what you were thinking about too, but I know, I think that's a good reminder for people to like turn cameras on, even if you're embarrassed, hide your self view. I do it every day.
I totally agree with that. And like, again, I think just from a position of like, working with students, it's just a little bit different in the sense of there's a full spectrum of economic backgrounds and things like that. And it's different than the 10 people that I work with on a regular basis and that I have an existing relationship with is much different. And yeah, I agree, Jordan. I am always in favor of put your camera on. That's just like my de facto. I think that's the better play. Again, like for a number of reasons. For like you're saying, like people get a sense of some body language that you have. You're strengthening the relationships that you have, and conversely, you're helping them from breaking down. I think that was a good point that I didn't bring up. Is that I think we've all been on both sides of when someone is short with you and you don't know if is it something that I said or is it just like the way and body language and like eye contact. It's not really eye contact, but whatever, screen to screen contact of seeing a person can help to like mitigate that confusion or misunderstanding. And I think in a helpful way.
I know I'm always aware, I'm newer to the Zoom world, but I'm always aware of crazy face or yawning or, anything that will just be, off-putting to the facilitator. So
I think it's definitely
you've been very good, by the way.
Thank you. I think any facilitator should recognize like the humanity of their audience, and like people are going to yawn and cough, and I would say
Oh, Josh, I couldn't hear. I think we lost you somehow.
Yeah, sorry, my headphones died. Can everyone hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. They have a very short battery life now. But yeah, I mean, I think like what you're speaking to is just like, in a regular meeting, I say regular because again, I don't want this to be normal going forward, but like, in a regular meeting, people are going to yawn and cough and, whisper things to other people. I think that's just like normal behavior. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think any presenter would be much happier with, welcome. Any presenter would be much happier with like seeing your face and seeing the fact that you're yawning than like looking at a black screen for the entirety of the discussion. Also, we're all definitely new to Zoom. Don't worry. This is, I've used it like maybe 5 times before everything happened. So we're all learning together.
Yeah, I think that's a great way for us to maybe wrap up. Like, we are so glad you are all here participating in this learning journey with us for a pandemic that is going on 1 year, that to celebrate my 2nd birthday in quarantine. So just a reminder, right? We thought we would be out of this every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, and knowing like this is our new normal, as Josh said, and we're learning, but we're committing ourselves to this learning every day because we know we want to keep fostering those healthy relationships and with our colleagues and external partners and everybody. So we're doing the best we can. So thank you, Josh, so much. Like, round of applause. Such a pleasure having this workshop. And I'm really, really excited for our next one that we'll be having again in 2 weeks on tone and language in the workplace, which I think will really expand. Well, we know will really expand on what we talked about tonight. So if you have any questions, Josh and I will put our information in the chat. Please feel free to follow up with us. And yeah, we can stick on for a few minutes, but if not, thank you for being here and have a wonderful night.
Thank you, everybody.